New this morning, President Trump is taking his global trade war to the Supreme Court now, urging the justices to overturn a lower court ruling that found that his administration acted unlawfully.
A dramatic legal clash is unfolding at the highest level of the American justice system. President Donald Trump has formally appealed to the United States Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling that declared many of his sweeping tariffs illegal. The case is not just about economics. It is about the very foundation of presidential power, the role of Congress, and the limits of executive authority in a democracy. Billions of dollars in revenue, delicate international trade negotiations, and Trump's signature America First policy now hang in the balance. If the Supreme Court rules against him, it could upend years of trade strategy and force the government to refund billions. If it rules in his favor, it could expand presidential authority in ways unseen since the founding of the Republic. Chapter 1. Trump's Tariff Revolution. From his earliest campaign rallies to his final days in office, Donald Trump made tariffs a cornerstone of his political brand. He argued that for too long, foreign nations, especially China, had taken advantage of the United States, flooding the country with cheap imports while American workers suffered. Once in office, Trump signed executive orders imposing a 10% baseline tariff on imports from over 90 countries. He introduced reciprocal tariffs, matching foreign nations that charged higher duties on U.S. goods. And he targeted strategic sectors, steel, aluminum, agriculture, and consumer electronics, in an attempt to revive domestic manufacturing. For Trump, tariffs were not just taxes, they were weapons in an economic war. He wielded them to pressure allies, punish rivals, and shape global negotiations. The result was a trade policy unlike anything the U.S. had pursued in decades, bold, disruptive, and deeply controversial. Chapter 2. The IEEPA and Trump's Emergency Declaration. To justify this sweeping program, Trump turned to the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA. Passed in 1977, the IEEPA was designed to give presidents flexibility during genuine crises, such as terrorism, rogue states, or major disruptions to national security. Traditionally, it had been used for sanctions, freezing assets, blocking transactions, or restricting hostile foreign actors. Trump's innovation, and critics say his overreach, was to declare that America's trade imbalance itself was a national emergency. He argued that persistent deficits, the erosion of U.S. manufacturing, and unfair practices by nations like China posed an unusual and extraordinary threat. By framing trade as a security emergency, Trump claimed the power to bypass Congress and impose tariffs directly. For a while, the strategy held, but as lawsuits mounted, the legal foundations of his argument began to crumble. Chapter 3. Court Battles and the Federal Circuit's Ruling. Small businesses and state coalitions quickly challenged Trump's authority. They argued that tariffs, unlike sanctions, were fundamentally about taxation and commerce, powers the Constitution assigns to Congress, not the president. The first major blow came in May when the U.S. Court of International Trade ruled the tariffs unlawful. Though the decision was paused during appeals, it signaled a judicial skepticism toward Trump's sweeping interpretation of emergency powers. The fight escalated at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit. In a landmark 7-4 decision, the judges ruled against Trump. They stated clearly that the IEEPA neither mentions tariffs nor grants unlimited presidential authority to impose them. Instead, they reaffirmed that setting tariffs is a core congressional power. The court's majority opinion stressed that when Congress intends to delegate tariff authority, it does so explicitly, citing past laws where the word tariff was used. To stretch the IEEPA into granting this power, they argued, would undermine the Constitution's separation of powers. Chapter 4. Trump's Appeal to the Supreme Court. Trump was not about to let the matter end there. Within days, his administration filed an emergency appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Solicitor General John Sauer described the stakes in dire terms. The stakes in this case could not be higher, Sauer wrote. He warned that the appellate decision had already disrupted delicate trade negotiations with foreign powers and cast doubt on the president's ability to protect America in times of crisis. In plain terms, Trump's legal team is asking the Supreme Court to expand the interpretation of emergency powers, giving presidents a free hand to impose tariffs during economic emergencies. If the court agrees, it would hand Trump and every future president extraordinary authority over trade policy. If the court refuses, Trump's tariffs could collapse overnight, forcing refunds of billions and throwing his economic strategy into chaos. Chapter 5. The human impact, small businesses under pressure. For small businesses, the tariff wars have been a crushing burden. Jeffrey Schwab of the Liberty Justice Center, representing several plaintiffs, described the situation bluntly. These unlawful tariffs are inflicting serious harm on small businesses and jeopardizing their survival. Importers of raw materials like steel and aluminum saw costs skyrocket. Retailers who relied on cheap goods from Asia suddenly faced razor-thin margins. Farmers caught in the crossfire of retaliatory tariffs from China lost overseas markets. One Midwestern tool manufacturer reported that the price of imported components rose by 25%, forcing layoffs. A family-run furniture store in Texas saw its supply chain disrupted and prices climb, driving customers away. For these businesses, the fight is not about constitutional theory. It is about survival. Their lawsuits argue that Trump's policies, while billed as national security measures, were economic experiments that picked winners and losers, with small businesses often on the losing end. Chapter 6. Tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China. Perhaps the most controversial part of Trump's program was his decision to hit close allies, Canada and Mexico, with tariffs. He justified them by claiming the need to stop the flow of drugs across the border, though critics said this was a flimsy excuse. With China, the confrontation escalated into a full-blown trade war. Billions in tariffs were exchanged on both sides, with Beijing targeting American soybeans, pork, and manufacturing equipment. Farmers in Iowa, already struggling, became collateral damage in the geopolitical chess match. These tariffs not only strained relations, but also complicated the newly signed USMCA trade deal, which was supposed to reset relations between North American neighbors. For many observers, Trump's approach looked less like negotiation and more like economic warfare, waged simultaneously against rivals and allies alike. The appellate ruling struck down these tariffs as well, finding that they too were beyond Trump's emergency powers. Chapter 7. Billions at stake, economics and politics. The sheer financial magnitude of Trump's tariffs cannot be ignored. Since their imposition, the U.S. Treasury has collected tens of billions of dollars from importers. Trump frequently claimed this was money flowing directly from foreign nations, but economists pointed out that the burden actually fell on American companies and consumers. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, the U.S. government may be forced to issue massive refunds. That would shake federal finances, complicate budget planning, and trigger new political battles over who should benefit from those repayments. Politically, the case strikes at Trump's core narrative. He has sold himself as a defender of American workers and a master dealmaker who could bend global trade to America's will. A defeat in the Supreme Court would puncture that image, potentially framing his tariffs not as genius but as unlawful overreach. Chapter 8. The Constitutional Stakes. Executive versus Congress. At the heart of the dispute lies a constitutional clash as old as the Republic, the balance of power between Congress and the presidency. The Constitution explicitly grants Congress the power to levy taxes, duties, and tariffs. Presidents are tasked with enforcing laws, not writing them. Trump's move to impose tariffs under the IEEPA stretches the meaning of emergency powers to its limit. The appellate judges were clear. If the Supreme Court were to allow this interpretation, it would effectively hand the White House a permanent blank check over trade policy. That, they warned, would erode Congress's constitutional role and set a precedent for executive overreach in other areas as well. The Supreme Court now faces a historic choice: reaffirm Congress's primacy in trade or expand presidential power in ways that could transform U.S. governance for decades? Chapter 9: Global Repercussions and Diplomatic Fallout. The world is watching this case closely. Trump's tariffs have already reshaped global trade and strained alliances. China retaliated with tariffs that hit U.S. farmers hard, shifting supply chains to other nations. Europe accused Washington of undermining the rules-based global trade order. Canada and Mexico, despite being America's closest partners, felt betrayed by the aggressive measures. If the Supreme Court strikes down Trump's program, allies may breathe a sigh of relief seeing it as a return to stability. But if the court upholds it, future presidents may wield tariffs as unilateral weapons, heightening uncertainty in the global economy. Foreign leaders are not just watching the legal arguments. They are gauging whether the U.S. remains a predictable partner or whether trade policy will swing wildly with each administration. Chapter 10: The Road Ahead, a defining test for American democracy. As October approaches, the Supreme Court faces one of the most consequential cases in years. With a conservative majority, including 3 Trump appointees, the outcome is uncertain and politically charged. For small businesses, a ruling against Trump could provide long-awaited relief. For the administration, a victory would vindicate its America First vision and strengthen executive power for generations. For Congress, the case is a test of its willingness to reclaim constitutional authority. Ultimately, this is about more than tariffs. It is about the limits of presidential power, the health of American democracy, and the stability of global trade. Will the court reinforce checks and balances, or will it tilt the scales toward an increasingly powerful executive? The decision will not just shape Trump's legacy, it will shape the future of every president who follows him. Donald Trump's Supreme Court appeal is a battle over far more than trade policy. It is about power, principle, and the role of government itself. If the justices side with him, the presidency will gain unprecedented authority over tariffs and foreign policy. If they rule against him, it will reaffirm the Constitution's careful separation of powers. So what do you think? Should presidents have sweeping authority to impose tariffs during economic crises? Or should that power remain with Congress where the Constitution placed it? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dive documentaries on politics and global affairs.